this actually came about, this Happy Chappy. I've got no idea where I came up with the name. This Happy Chappy guide and a Happy Chappy workshop. It came about because really from a couple of different, there's a couple of different reasons why I made it. The first one was I was coaching a lot of people during the first lockdown in the UK. So from March, April, May, June, I started to wind it down a bit there because it was getting a bit too much. What I'd said to some of my corporate clients was, if you've got people that are struggling for whatever reason, if you connect them with me, and then I'll reach out to them, and then we'll arrange Zoom coaching. So I did a lot of coaching online, a lot of digital coaching, and I noticed a few things. I coached it was an incredible amount of people. It's probably over 100 odd people. Some only just one session, some 4 or 5, maybe even 6 sessions. But one of the things that I noticed was young people seem to be dealing worse with the lockdown than perhaps older people. Different people were struggling for different reasons, understandably. So people with young families were struggling because they were trying to juggle looking after children while still working from home and balancing that. Young people with no families were struggling because they were in an apartment on their own with no garden, so they were kind of isolated. So different people were struggling for different reasons, which is absolutely understandable. But young people seem to be dealing with it worse than older people, and which surprised me because they were the least at risk of the actual virus. So it wasn't the virus that was the problem, it was actually the lockdown was the thing that was the problem, not the virus. What else happened at the same time, this was kind of simultaneously going on, was my fiance was getting letters from the NHS, which were fairly strongly worded letters, about shielding, about the dangers of should she catch coronavirus, and when you take that kind of messaging that she was getting from the NHS, which was well intended, no doubt, but when you take that messaging and then you add that to what we were watching on the news, on pretty much, sort of on constant circulation, constantly tuned in, seeing what's going on the news. And there was so much negative news, so much fear caused by these letters, that it started to have a really negative effect on her mental health, to the point where, at one point, I was going out to get the shop and then coming back and having to, take all my clothes off, wash my clothes, disinfect all the food that was coming into the house. And that was really driven because of what was going on, both from a news perspective and the messages that we were getting. So I started playing around with this idea of, well, what can you do proactively to alleviate some of that negative messaging, some of that stress? What can we each do individually? What can we each do, take responsibility for ourselves? And if we were to do these things, would that have a positive effect? And what we found out was absolutely yes. So this is where it came from. Now, this is the suggestion that frames the whole Happy Chappy workshop. So 6 easy to apply, short daily habits. And if you were to do them every day and maintain them, could lead to 37% more success. I think that's in job interview style situations. 19% more accurate at making decisions under pressure. 23% fewer fatigue symptoms, 10 times more engaged, 3 times more creative, and 31% more productive. Now, those are pretty bold and huge gains to be had. And this is actually taken from something called the happiness dividend by a positive psychologist called Sean Aker. As you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, 2009 the study was done. It was in the Harvard Business Review. This was done the year after, obviously, after the economic collapse of 2008, so in very tough situation and circumstances. He was able to go into KPMG in America and achieve this improvement really by getting the people to adopt positive habits daily. So do the right thing day after day, keep doing the right things, and then sooner or later you start to get really massive improvements. So obviously most people are familiar with this now. Our good friend COVID-19 is obviously, there's various different pictures of this little fella. There's blue ones and red ones, and I think I've even seen green ones. All of this kind of this sort of globe, this miniature globe with lots of aggressive suckers on it. Now, it's interesting, isn't it, that the news channels should choose to use this kind of zoomed in representation of COVID-19. Now, that could be for a number of reasons. One could be it personifies the disease. You know, it goes from an invisible thing to this is it, up close, you know, makes it big and large and it, in some respects, quite intimidating and terrifying. They might use this because they might want us all to be afraid, and this isn't so much from a kind of a conspiracy theory angle, but just from a humanistic point of view, humans are more compliant when they're afraid. So fear is actually a good thing sometimes because it gets people to do what you want them to do. And if you're asking for them to do certain things, stay in, social distance, wash your hands, the way you reinforce that behavior is by adding fear. If you don't wash your hands, this is what's waiting for you. If you don't stay more than 1.5 meters away from each other, this what could be jumping from one person to the next. So a little bit of fear is good. Now the problem with this is too much fear, and that can have a hugely negative effect on the person's mental well-being. So if you take Ruth's example, she got these letters, quite a few letters as well from the NHS. The news was very, very negative. It was pictures of people on ventilators in Italian hospitals, Spanish hospitals clogging up. And obviously she's getting these letters and she's watching this news, and that's creating a huge amount of fear. Now, the problem with that is too much of that, and then suddenly what you do is you start to spiral quite quickly, which can end up with things like agoraphobia, anxiety, all because you're just constantly on edge. So they want us to be afraid. Effectively, all of our emotions is just a case of chemistry, combinations of stuff happening inside us, neurotransmitters, hormones, chemicals, you know, moving around our body, moving around our brains, which affect the way we feel in any moment. So if it's just chemistry, then surely, if it is chemistry, the question is, how do we influence that chemistry? How do we influence the way we feel by the way we behave? The things that we do, can we do things, can we have behaviors and habits and daily stuff that we participate in, which then influences and affects the chemistry and everything that's going on inside of us, which then makes us feel a certain way? Well, the answer is pretty resoundingly yes. Now, there's actually a fifth element to this. So there's 4 neurotransmitters and hormones here, but there's a 5th one, which is GABA. But I don't need to worry too much about getting into the semantics of all the different names and all the different titles. These are the 4 main ones that we often talk about, often shortened down to a dose. So we've got dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. The magic 4, and then obviously we add GABA in there as well, the 5th one. The right amounts of these inside your brain, the right amounts of these neurotransmitters and hormones going around your body, if you get the right amounts and if you get enough of each, you feel really good. You feel really great. You've got lots of connection. You're doing the stuff that you love doing. You feel fine. You feel happy. A reduction in any of these areas can have a catastrophic effect. Now, if we were to think about lockdown as a social condition, and let's use a specific demographic, a young person lives in an apartment, has their own 1 or 2 bedroom apartment, very highly sociable, used to having lots and lots of connections, lots of friends, going out, socializing a lot of the time, seeing friends, seeing family, loves going to the gym, plays sport on a Saturday. That's the kind of stereotype we'll go for. When you look at the social conditioning of lockdown, and when you look at these 4 neurotransmitters, and then you look at that specific person and that demographic, suddenly you can start to understand why a lot of young people struggled, and why a lot of people were surprised by what effect lockdown had on them. So if we take dopamine, first of all, dopamine is our pleasure reward neurotransmitter. When we do something we like doing, we get a little bit of dopamine. Dopamine also has an amazing secondary effect, that it switches on your learning receptors in your brain. Dopamine, when you've got dopamine present in your brain, you're more intelligent as a person. You think better, you think more clearly. When you do something you really like doing and you feel really good doing it, the reason you do that is because you have dopamine. It's also the basis of addiction in a negative way. So gambling addiction, alcoholism, drug addiction, it's as much to do with what's going on inside your brain as what you're putting inside your body. Now, if you think about this logically, a lot of people associate addiction, say for instance, alcoholism or alcoholics, with being addicted to the alcohol in the drink, which is obviously very much true. But at the same time, there's also what's going on inside the person's brain, which is important. And the way to understand this is there's no chemicals in gambling. There's no alcohol or cocaine or heroin. There's no chemical hooks there. But gambling is absolutely addictive, and it's to do with dopamine. But it's a good thing, dopamine. It's a good thing. We get a dose of it when we do something we like doing. Then you've got, say for instance, we go down to oxytocin, also known as the cuddle hormone. It's our bonding neurotransmitter. When you hug someone that you care about, you get a dump of oxytocin. When you kiss someone, when you have any kind of physical contact, anything like that will induce a little bit of oxytocin. Young mothers obviously get it huge amounts when they have a baby to bond with the child, and we bond with each other using oxytocin. Now, if you think about dopamine first and then oxytocin, and you think about lockdown, for a lot of people, they couldn't do the things that they really passionate about. So if we take our example of the person that I described before, might really like going out and playing football on a Saturday. As much to do with the exercise, being part of a team, but also the fact that you get outside and you participate with loads of your friends, and then you have from there you have you go into the clubhouse, you have drinks, so you kind of got this whole social element, this physical element, and this bonding element, all from this one thing that the person does on a Saturday. But obviously during lockdown, all of that stopped. So the dopamine that they would have been getting is suddenly now cut off. And also the oxytocin, which you're still going to get when you play a team sport like football, suddenly gone as well. Likewise with the oxytocin, they're not able to go out and see their friends and family. We've obviously got the digital connection via Zoom or whatever medium that's used, but it's not the same as what it was in terms of actually being in the same room with someone, sitting down, having a discussion with them, having fun, laughter, enjoyment, sharing experiences. Suddenly that's cut away. So dopamine and oxytocin, straight away you can see there's a reduction there. Serotonin, primarily sourced from vitamin D. Our best source of vitamin D is obviously the sun. Drenched in sunlight, you get tons and tons of vitamin D, which is great for serotonin. But unfortunately, even though the first lockdown, March, April, May, we had great weather, a lot of people I coached, because of the fear of the virus and the fear of catching it and the fear of the unknown, even though we were able to get outside for an hour, a lot of people, in my experience, coaching many young people through that period, chose not to go outside. They became kind of apathetic. So instead of going out and getting their 1 hour of exercise out in the sun, they would stay indoors because that was perceived as a safer place. Now, in some respects, you can totally understand that, but likewise, at the same time, paradoxically, it's safer inside, but what they're denying themselves then is the opportunity to get loads of vitamin D, which is obviously good for serotonin. Low serotonin is linked to being depression and being depressed, which is probably why people get SAD, the seasonal thingy disorder, where it's dark and it's grey and it's miserable, and you get very little vitamin D. One of the things that I was surprised about throughout the whole summer was how long it took the governments to start recommending supplementing vitamin D, telling people, take vitamin D, really, you would have thought that would have been pretty much from the outset, that message should have been getting hammered out there, take loads of vitamin D. And then endorphins, the last one. Endorphins, anyone that's done any kind of physical activity knows how wonderful endorphins are. You get this feel-good feeling afterwards when you've done something really physically arduous activity. The more physically demanding, I think, the more endorphins you get. So often when you're in the middle of a run and you've been going for 6-7 miles and you feel absolutely shattered and terrible, you don't feel great then, but when you persevere and you get finished and you do your 10 miles, and you might be absolutely fatigued physically, but you have this immense amount of good feeling, and that's all those endorphins. Also is our natural painkiller, mass pain. So if I've got a broken leg and a lion comes around the corner, I'm going to be able to sprint away. My body's going to dump endorphins. It's going to flood me with all of the neurotransmitters, everything I need to escape the lion. Obviously, it might not hurt at the time, my leg. If I was to escape the lion, I would suddenly find that it does hurt later on, obviously, but as the endorphins wear off. Now, once again, during lockdown, what happened from my perspective and in my experience was that people were exercising less. I think most people started off well, they started off really focused and disciplined. Everyone was up at 9 o'clock with Joe Wicks doing their exercise. And then what kinds of happens is, as the repetition creeps in and people get worn down by the situation, they get fatigued by the monotony, they become, I think, a little, not for everyone, but for many, a little bit more apathetic, a little bit more meh. I just can't be bothered today. You miss a day's training one day and then a day after that, and then suddenly you have 2 or 3 days where you don't train. And then it gets to that point now where you've kind of fallen out of that good habitual behavior, and you're not now getting the endorphins. So when you take this into consideration, it makes absolute sense what happened during lockdown, why a lot of people that perhaps didn't think they'd struggle suddenly struggled. And it was more to do with habits and behaviors as opposed to the virus. We weren't getting our dopamine, we weren't doing the things we love doing, we weren't getting our oxytocin, we weren't connecting with families and loved ones, we weren't getting the serotonin, even though the weather was good. By the way, talking about serotonin, a lot of people in the UK, from my experience in the minute, are finding the second lockdown, or the one they've just come out with, much harder than the first one, even though it's a shorter lockdown. The reason for that might be it's really grey and miserable now. So where we did the last one in the summer, where the weather was really great, and it was almost, especially if you had a garden, you could sit out in the back garden and at least get your vitamin D, at least have that kind of sun-drenched feel good. What we're experiencing now, and what I'm experiencing with the people I'm coaching, is that this second lockdown they're finding much more challenging, and that might be, as I say, a lot less serotonin and vitamin D, and then endorphins. We're not getting the physical rigorous activity which gives us our endorphins. So that magical that dose suddenly is taken away, interestingly, by our habits and behaviors. So all you need to do then is have a positive mental attitude, right? All you need to do is have a good PMA. Most people I know, most people that I chat to, have had this advice from someone. So this is kind of how it goes. Chatting away to someone, you're like, oh, I'm not really feeling myself. I'm a bit meh. I'm a bit apathetic. I can't put my finger on it. I don't know what's going on. I just can't be arsed. And then you get that really wonderful advice. You just need to have a positive mental attitude. And then you're kind of like, right, well, I'm all ears now, so carry on. And often that's where that advice ends. It's kind of like wonderfully well-sounded sound bites, but it's throwaway advice with no substance. And when you ask the person, well, what do I need to do this? Usually that's where the advice finishes. It's like, I don't know, just be positive, just have a positive mental attitude. Now, so it's not quite as simple as just saying to people, the way to have a good mindset in lockdown is just be positive. Wake up in the morning and be positive. Now, one of the places that I used to work was Battleback. Wonderful, wonderful place with amazing coaches. Battleback is funded by the British Legion. It's situated in a place called Lilleshall in Shropshire, which is the National Sports Centre. They've got their own multi-million-pound centre, which is, as I say, it's fully funded by the British Legion. Now, the coaches that work at Battleback, they're some of them are ex-military like myself, but many of them aren't. All now ex-military or no longer serving in the military. And the coaches are seconded into Battleback from Leeds Beckett University, and who we work with at Battleback is, or who I did work with, is what we'd call WIS, Wounded, Injured and Sick Service people. So, and that could be anything from breaking a leg and then recovering for the next 3 months, building your strength back up, all the way to, you know, having lost limbs or, you know, have some severe mental health issues like PTSD and everything in between. Now, at Battleback, what we do as coaches, we don't do any diagnosis, we don't do any prognosis, we don't do any, you should do this and you should do that. We just coach these men and women. And what we try and do is we try and coach them and impart some practical advice that they can use. Now, if you think about this idea of just telling someone to have a positive mental attitude, if you're, let's just say you're a service person, you might be struggling with anxiety, you might have some PTSD, you might have social anxiety, not like going outside, kind of reclusive, and coming to Battleback is a massive step. It's took, you know, a lot of courage just to get out the front door and get to Battleback for the week. You don't know what you're going to get, you're not sure what to expect, you're wondering whether it's going to be like a military week where you're going to be running around in combats, which it isn't, obviously. If I was to sit down with that person on the first day and say, you know, you just need to have a positive mental attitude, that just wouldn't cut with them. And, you know, it would probably piss them off a little bit, if I'm honest with you. So what we needed to do at Battleback was find ways that we could bring to life some of this advice. So we could tell people, you know, this is what you do, this is why it works, this is how you do it, and this is the benefit you'll get from it. So instead of just giving away throwaway advice, you know, just be positive, we have to show them or at least prove to them that there's some evidence and science behind it. Now, one of the great things about Battleback was it, all the stuff that we would teach would be backed up by the academic team there. So we'd have, you know, guys that were doing PhD theses around the work that we were doing. They would be the academic team, so they would kind of be in the peripheral whilst we'd be doing the coaching with the guys, and that worked really well because they'd be able to guide us with anything that was like inconsistent. Our job was to take their knowledge and package it in a way that someone sat in the chair, a soldier, can go, that makes sense to me. And this is what I'm going to do. Now, so this book here, Pam Grout's E Squared, I haven't read it myself, by the way. It's not my kind of book. 9 do-it-yourself energy experiments to prove your thoughts create reality. But let me tell you a little story about this book, and more specifically about a friend of mine that read this book. So the last thing I did in the RAF before I left in 2014 was I went to the Falklands for 4 months. Amazing thing to finish on. I'd always wanted to go to the Falklands, and ex-Royal Marine, I'd always been fascinated by everything that happened down there in 1982 and really wanted to go and see for myself. Obviously the Falklands being between the bottom of Argentina and the Antarctic, it's not somewhere you'd probably go and visit for holiday. So I knew that once I'd left the RAF, the chance I'd never go there. So having the opportunity to go in my last year was brilliant. And what was also great was I had some of my best friends were also going to be down there at the same time, so we'd all be able to hang around together. Now, I'd been there for 2 weeks, and a friend of mine was coming a couple of weeks after me, a friend of mine called Chris, and he was at RAF Bryce Norton waiting to fly out. Now, Chris was reading this book, and there's a chapter in this book which set, a lot of the chapters, they set you out tasks to do to bring, these ideas to life, to prove to you that they work. So in this chapter, it's about bringing things into your reality with your mind. So, bringing stuff that you want towards you, whether you want to call that, I don't know, manifestation or attraction or whatever you want to call it. Like I say, I haven't read this book myself, I've got to say. Now, the task it set Chris was to be consciously aware and to notice butterflies. Now, the thing was, Chris was reading this chapter and he was like, well, this kind of could be interesting. I'm sat here, I'm about to fly to the Falklands from Bryce Norton. Huge flight, you stop off at the Ascension Islands, you stay in a cage in the Ascension Islands, so you don't really get a chance to go out. Get back on the flight after they've refueled it, and then you carry on from the Ascension Islands all the way down to the Falklands. Now, he was flying out there in June 2014. It probably goes without saying that June is their winter because it's the Southern Hemisphere. The Falklands Island is pretty brutal all the year round. Specifically in the winter, it is non-stop 60 mile an hour winds and quite often snow. So Chris is kind of thinking to himself, I don't know if there's going to be many butterflies kicking around the Falklands in June. But he thought, do you know what, I'll give this a go, this should put it to the test. Kind of packed his book away, went to check his bags in at Gateway at Bryce Norton. And as he's checking his bags in, the SAC mover, who's like the kind of RAS version of a baggage handler, obviously needs to check his ID against the manifest, asks for his ID. Chris hands over his ID. She then takes it there, and on her hand just here is a tattoo of a little tiny butterfly on her hand, of which Chris sees this and is kind of like, would you believe it? What are the chances of that? He then gets on the flight. He's flying all the way down. He's obviously bored because it's a huge 18-hour flight, something ridiculous. So he's reading the in-flight magazine, and there's a double-page article about the reduction of butterfly numbers around the world and the effect on the ecosystem. And he kind of thinks to himself, well, obviously he's seen the tattoo, now he's read the article. And then he lands in the Falklands where I'm there to meet him. Gets off the plane, lands in arrivals, goes through, gets his baggage. As he's coming into the main airport where I'm waiting, the local school children have painted a mural on one of the walls to brighten it up. It's a little bit drab in MPA, of basically just nature. So trees, fields, all different animals that you might see, deers, specifically to the UK. And obviously, as you can imagine, all the way across the mural are butterflies dotted all the way across this. And Chris sees these butterflies and has read this magazine and has noticed this tattoo all in the last 15 or 16 hours. And then starts to think, actually, the book's right. You do bring this into reality. Now, the thing about this is the butterflies were always going to be there, obviously. The girl with a tattoo wasn't manifested because he was thinking about butterflies, and the magazine wasn't created because he was thinking about butterflies. The only difference is he wouldn't have noticed them before. Now, this is kind of important because there's a part of your brain that works a little bit like Google, in so much that if I search in Google for butterflies, I'm obviously going to get given loads of options of websites and images and articles about butterflies, and if I was to click on a few of those and a few of those links, that would take me through to websites, take me through to articles. If I would click on the images, I'd get images after images after images of butterflies. Now, let me ask you a question. What would start to happen on my computer from now, or my phone? So I've been doing a load of research around butterflies. What's going to start to happen, like on my Facebook and Instagram and things like that? So I'm going to get, marketed for the butterfly annual manual or whatever, annual manual, there's such thing as that. I might get given documentaries, anything that's related to butterflies. I'm now open to get marketed to. And the reason for that, as most of us know, is cookies. You know, it's what we search for, the internet will give us back. Now, if I don't know about this, I would just think this is coincidental. I'd think, oh my God, I've only just been looking at butterflies, and would you believe it, there's an advert for another butterflies. Now, your brain in a certain way works the same, in so much that you create a browser history of your thinking. Now, let me give you a couple of examples of this. Most people have experienced this. So, for instance, women that want to have a baby, they start to notice pregnant women everywhere. So they're walking down the street and they see a pregnant woman or a woman that's just had a baby, then another one, and everywhere they see babies. Now, but most commonly, in what most people have experienced firsthand is you decide to buy a new car, you do a load of research, you go to you go test drive it at the dealership. You go on the internet, you're looking at pictures of it because you're going to be your new car, so you're infatuated about looking at it. And then what happens when you start driving around? So you haven't got your car, it doesn't come for another month because it has to get shipped onto the island. So you're driving around in your old car, but what do you start to notice everywhere? The car that you want to buy, suddenly you're thinking, has everybody decided to buy the same car as me? Now, the same as the pregnant women, the same as the butterflies, it's all the same thing. Those cars were always going to be there, the women were always going to be there, and the butterflies for Chris were always going to be there. The only thing that was different was he was paying attention to them. So if you think about the cars as an example, as you're driving along, because you've got a browser history, your Google cookies is full of this car, full of searches for this. Every time your subconscious notices the car, it turns your awareness to it. You go, oh look, there's one of those cars. Now, if it's a different make, different color, it's not, or a completely different model, those cars just go past and they don't command your attention. But because your browser history is full of what you've been searching for, anything that is that, you'll just go dink, dink. Oh look, there's another one. There's another one. Now, what your brain doesn't do is it doesn't register all the other cars though. So all the other ones that are driving past, it doesn't register them. So you start to think that you're seeing these everywhere, when actually you're seeing them in no greater ratio than before. So how does this kind of relate to one second. So this part of the brain is called the RAS, the reticular activating system. It's kind of like a pencil-shaped thing, the red thing there, that's the reticular formation. Now, the RAS, information comes into the RAS via your senses. So it's kind of like Google. You get the searches come in via sensors, and then it sorts it all out in there. Now, what will happen then, depending on your browser history, depending on what you've got on your cookies, your RAS will get rid of information that isn't important, so it gets rid of all the other cars that you're driving past. It just deletes them. It doesn't need to pay attention. But the moment it's a red BMW and that's what you've decided to buy and that's what you've been researching, the moment it's you pay attention to it, it comes into your RAS, the information comes in there, it gets spread out to the neocortex, your thinking brain, and then you become aware of it consciously. And then but the other stuff, the other cars that aren't the same color, aren't the same model, they just get deleted. Now, consider this for a moment, and this is kind of the way we teach it with you guys at Battleback. If I was to put into Google, I fucking hate my life, what would Google give me for that search request? If I was to put my life shit, or even worse, I don't want to be here anymore, what would Google give me for those search requests? It would give me a huge amount of stuff that I probably don't want to look at, images, websites, things that are not helpful. So with these guys that we used to work with the Battleback, what we had to do was convince them that what they thought about mattered. So if they were constantly thinking negative thoughts, their browser history would be full of negative stuff. Now your brain, in its immense capacity and ability, will find evidence to support what you believe. So if you're thinking non-stop about red BMWs, you'll start to see red BMWs. If you're thinking non-stop about how shit everything is, your brain will find the evidence to support it. So it will, every time something happens which supports that belief, it'll point it out to your awareness. and that then strengthens the belief. And you start to go, well, actually, there's another example of I'm right with my thinking, when actually what's happening is you're almost shining a torch in all the wrong places. So why is this important? So one way that you can start to reprogram your RAS is do things like a gratitude log. Now, telling a load of grizzly soldiers to do a gratitude log every day, if you don't explain to them why it could be really useful, there's no way they'll ever do it. But if you explain to them about the RAS in their brain, suddenly a gratitude log makes sense, because if you were to every day put just two or three things that you're grateful for, and they don't need to be grand stuff. It doesn't need to be, you know, I'm grateful for my house and my partner, wife, husband, kids, these big things. It can just be quite insignificant stuff. You know, I'm grateful that I was struggling with my shopping and someone held the door for me. And usually I wouldn't notice it, but I was really grateful that they did that little thing for me. Now what happens is, because you've got to do 2 or 3 new things each day, after a little while, you will have exhausted all the obvious stuff, family, friends, your car, house, whatever it is that you're grateful for. And what will happen is, once you've exhausted that easy to access conscious stuff, you have to work a little bit harder. And what your brain's going to do is constantly be on the scan throughout the day, looking for 2 or 3 things for you to be grateful for your log. Now what that does then is you start to fill your browser history with focus and attention and thinking around things to be grateful for. And suddenly, after a few weeks, you start to notice lots of things to be positive and grateful for. But it does take time to do, and it does take perseverance and effort. You have to keep going with it day after day. But what we know is that after only a few weeks, a lot of the guys that were from Battleback, what they would say is that they just felt more positive. They felt more, generally just more positive, because they were looking for things to be positive about. So Lisa, so obviously I'll leave the surname off. A friend of mine, Lisa, so this is the right hand side's fMRI scan, not hers, just one I got off the internet to use as a picture. But the left hand one is Lisa. Now, it's difficult to read there, but what you've got in the top left hand corner is dopamine in blue, serotonin in dark purple. You can't see it on there, but it's this dark purple one here. GABA, which is kind of like the light yellow. Oxytocin, which is the orange, and then endorphins, which is the yellow one. And then the bottom one, cortisol, which is red. It's difficult to see in there, but you can see better with the graph here. Now, so often it's very difficult to have evidence to support these ideas. So doing these little behaviors will have a positive impact on the way I feel and think. What Lisa was able to do amazingly was bring this to life with evidence. Now, it was only with herself, so it was only a test population of 1, so it wasn't like a control group and another 100 in this group and 100 in that group. So it was just 1. So you could say, this could be fluke. But anyway, she was under the care of UCL, so University College London. And the reason for that was that she'd had a growth on her brain that required a fairly intrusive brain surgery to take out. It was not unrisky doing it. It did come with its risks. She had to, it took a longer time to recover. It took many, many months for her to recover. And when she was finally on the road to recovery, what she wanted to do is, alongside UCL, was understand whether or not daily habits could affect the way she felt. So just doing things, small habits every single day, how could that affect? Now, what we've got is a 21-day challenge here that Lisa did. And then every 7 days, she goes into UCL. They do an fMRI scan, they have a look at that. But really importantly, they measure all of these hormones and neurotransmitters present in the body. And she does this every 7 days. Now you can see from here, day 7, day 14, day 21, the real hockey stick benefit comes from 2 weeks onwards. So that last 7 days, we have got like a general increase for the first 14 days, but it really does sharply go up, especially dopamine, which is the light blue one. dopamine almost goes from third place and it fires straight up. Now, what she did was a handful of behaviors, not the same ones as I'm going to show you. Some of hers were slightly different, but effectively the next slide that I'm going to show you, she just incorporated these behaviors every single day for 21 days. So 10 minutes exercise a day minimum, preferably more, but sometimes, especially if you're working with people that have a really full diary, they're really, really busy, you might have an hour commute into work, an hour commute back out of work if you work somewhere like London. You have to make things so that as least time intrusive as possible. So rather than say you need to do 60 minutes exercise, a really good 10-minute HIIT session will do. And that's kind of like what I say to people. If you can't do an hour's exercise, that's fine, but you could get 20 minutes where you've got a couple of minutes to warm up and mobilize and get the blood flow, and 10 minutes of a HIIT session and then a little bit of warm down, and then you're good to go. If you want an example of this, try and do as many burpees as you can in 10 minutes, and you will have never sweated so much in your life. 10 minutes finished, and you won't want to do another burpee for the rest of your life. So 8 hours sleep and a reduction of alcohol. Better still, I'll try going alcohol free for 21 days, just to give it a go. Now the reason why the sleep and the reduction in alcohol are in the same one is alcohol represses the really deep, nourishing, restorative sleep that you need. Most people intuitively know this. If you've had a really good skinful of drink, you sleep really well, but you're really restless in your sleep. You're moving around, you're wriggling around. And then when you wake up the next day, you might have had like 10 or 12 hours, but still you're really tired and fatigued. And the reason for that is that full circadian rhythms, which is a rhythmic cycle that we have in our sleep, we want the really deep NREM sleep as well, which alcohol represses out. Interestingly as well, according to Professor Matthew Walker, sleeping tablets do the same thing. Sleeping tablets help you go to sleep, but they repress the deep nourishing sleep. So if you take alcohol out of the equation, what you usually find for most people, myself included, is your sleep improves very drastically when you take alcohol out of the equation. After 3 or 4 days or a week of not drinking at all, your sleep gets really, really good. So 8 hours, minimum 8 hours if possible. Some little tips for sleep hygiene. Go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time. We shouldn't need an alarm clock. It's the worst invention ever. It doesn't wake you up when you're in your natural rhythmic cycle. But if you went to bed, say for instance, went to bed at 10 o'clock every night with an aim to be asleep by 11, so an hour kind of wind down, and then slept through till 6 or 7 in the morning the following day, and you got that 7 or 8 hours sleep, you always went to bed at the same time, you always went to sleep roughly the same time, you wake up at the same time. That's really, really good for your sleep hygiene, that is. Specifically weekends. It's a fallacy that it's good to lay in bed at the weekend. It's better to keep the same rhythmic cycle if possible. So 8 hours sleep. Another couple of things for sleep hygiene actually while we're on it. So going to bed and waking up at the same time, making your room cold and as dark as possible. So the way to be able to understand how cold it should be is if you're just in your underpants or your underwear, you should be uncomfortable and want to get in your bed because you're too cold outside of it. And then when you get in your bed, you don't want your bed to be warm, you actually want it to be cold. And then what will happen is the darkness in the cold will trigger the melatonin, which allows you to go to sleep. If you think about evolution, the way we went to sleep before we invented electricity was when the sun went down, it went dark and it went cold, and that triggered us to go to sleep. That's why when you go camping, as soon as the sun goes down and it's like 7, 8 o'clock at night, it's like you've been hit with a tranquilizer dart and you can't keep your eyes open. So cold room, as dark as possible, going to bed, waking up at the same time, and then take alcohol out of the equation. A couple of minutes of mindfulness per day. That doesn't mean you need to be sat in the lotus position. That can be just spending 2 or 3 minutes paying attention to your senses, paying attention to any sounds that are in your awareness, any sensations, any feelings, paying attention to how your body feels when you walk. Anything that you're dedicating all of your concentration and focus to the here and now will allow you to kind of get into that mindfulness state. Now, the other way to do this is, well, there's loads of ways you can achieve this. You can go to courses, that's like on the Isle of Man, people like Mike Cooley, incredible, will teach you everything you need to know, everything from just doing 10 minutes of mindfulness to he does like these 3-day silent retreats. But also just getting an app like Headspace, 8 or 10 minutes, put your headphones in and allow the guy from Headspace to talk you through the whole process. Now the reason why this is so good is that we have this like cultural ADHD where we're constantly in a rush everywhere. We're constantly thinking in the future, where do I need to be later? Where's my meeting at later? Who am I meeting after work? Who am I meeting for lunch? Just spending 2, 3, 4, 5, or preferably 10 minutes, allowing your brain to slow down, allowing everything just to settle a little bit, is actually really, really good. Journaling 3 things that you're grateful for each day goes back to the RAS, starts to reprogram the RAS, the reticular activating system. Your brain starts to search for these things to be grateful for, and soon enough you're unconsciously looking for things to be grateful for, which then affects you in your conscious experience. You just feel better, you feel more positive. Does it stop you having a terrible day? Of course it doesn't. You might have one of those days where everything just goes wrong, one thing after the other. But if you start from kind of this position of good, positive mindset, if you do have a terrible day, you might end up here. But if you start from here, you wake up and it's all doom, gloom and Chicken Little, then you're going to start from there and potentially on your bad day, keep going downwards. Explain and describe one positive experience that occurred during the day. So most people, when they get home from work, the first thing that they'll talk about is something that went wrong in the day, someone that pissed them off in the day, someone that annoyed them in the day. Now, the wonderful thing about explaining a positive experience is when you talk to someone about something good that happened, you have to use your memories to verbalize the description. You need to use your memories to recount what it was. Now, what happens as a byproduct of that is you relive the experience. You feel good as you're doing it. So as you're telling the person about something that really good that happened, it might be a joke someone told you, it might be something that you saw that day, it might be an experience you had, it might be meeting someone for a coffee or lunch. Reliving that experience, you get double the positive. So you get the actual experience, which was good, but then the secondary experience when you tell someone about it, where you get another hit of that positivity. So it's getting into the habit of, instead of going home and complaining about what had happened that day, it's finding something to be positive about. Once again, it doesn't stop you having negative experiences. Now, I often say to people that if the fastest way to improve your well-being is switch the news off. Now, by the way, one of the things that Lisa did as well, she changed her diet. I haven't put that on here. So Lisa went, I think, is it pescatarian where you eat fish? So I think she chose a pescatarian diet and just ate really clean and obviously took alcohol out. Now, sometimes it's not feasible for people to not watch any TV for 21 days. You might be in the middle of a Netflix series. I think there's no way I'm going 21 days before I watch the next episode, which is fine. What I would say though is cut the news out. You're going to find out what's going on. You're going to find out from various people and conversations. I don't watch the news anymore at all, really. I catch it sometimes in the background, depending on whose house I'm at, but I make an effort not to watch the news. And the reason for this is, let's go back to the RAS. So your brain is a pattern searching machine. The ratio, if I was to watch the news, the ratio of bad news to good news, what would it be? 90-10? That's been nice as well. Most of it is doom. It's wars, murders, death, pandemics, diseases. Now, if your brain's a pattern searching machine and the news is a ratio of 90-10, what would happen if your brain started to interpret reality as 90% of reality is bad, 10% good? When actually, let's be realistic, it's actually the other way around, I think. 90% of reality is great. There is some rubbish stuff, but it's like 10%, I'd say. So watching the news can have a negative effect on your mental health because your brain starts to program itself that most of the stuff that's going on in the world is bad, when it isn't that way at all. Absolutely not. So if not, switch the whole TV off. Definitely switch the news off. Definitely switch the news off. Denzel Washington said, if you don't read the papers, you're uninformed, and if you do read the papers, you're misinformed. I don't think he was too far off the mark there. So this is it. 6 behaviours. Probably a lot of these are passive as well. So sleep is passive. Turning off the TV is passive. What I mean by passive is it doesn't take any time to do it. It actually frees time up. Well, if you were to turn the TV off, what could you do with this time that you did watch TV? All in all, would take less than 20 minutes to do this per day. 20-minute investment, and then you get the benefit of the slide before. 8 hours is what we aim for. That's like the gold standard. But I know we've talked about sleep a little bit today. A book that you might want to check out is the book that I talked about before, Professor Matthew Walker, Why We Sleep. It might be uncomfortable reading though, because what it talks about is all of the negative effects and the negative things that come out of getting continual reduction of sleep. Yeah, give it a listen. It's fascinating. It really is. It really is. Good.